Hello and welcome to our bi-weekly review show, Yeah or Nah. Really excited you chose to join us today. Let's get started. Today we're talking about Tyrants of the Underdark, a game from Dungeons & Dragons and Gale Force Nine. It's a deck building and area control game for 2 to 4 players. You build your deck, building a stronger and stronger core of minions and sending them off to do your bidding. As the game progresses, your minions become more and more powerful, and you send them across the board to secure important sites in the Underdark. But your enemies have agents too, and you'll struggle for control of a variety of very important sites throughout the Underdark, with eventually one of you becoming the supreme tyrant. The game, as I mentioned, is a collaboration between Gale Force 9 and Dungeons & Dragons, so if you're catching the Dungeons & Dragons references, it is intentional. Now, you don't need to know Dungeons & Dragons to play this game at all. I'm going to say that right off the top. If you know Dungeons & Dragons, you're going to find some Easter eggs, and you're going to get a laugh from some of the flavor texts, but you absolutely don't need to know the rules of D&D to play and enjoy this game, particularly if you've read the work of R.A. Salvatore, who's spent a lot of time talking about the Drow and the politics of the Underdark. You're going to get some of the Easter eggs, and you may get a bit of additional enjoyment, but Dungeons & Dragons knowledge is not at all a prerequisite for enjoying this game. Okay, let's talk about Tyrants of the Underdark and how it plays. The goal of the game is to score the most victory points. You score victory points in a number of different ways. You can recruit powerful minions into your deck. You can control important sites across the Underdark. You can defeat enemy troops and more. But ultimately, the most victory points wins. Now, let's take a look at the components and what you're going to get in the second edition box of Tyrants of the Underdark. The box, the board, the rulebook, the player boards, each of them is the same except for the color. There are no powers. The market board, the core cards, the starter cards, the 6 minion decks, victory and site tokens, unaligned troop tokens, 4 bags of troop tokens and spies, a score sheet. Now, if you played the first edition of this game, you likely noticed a big difference. The box is much smaller and there's no miniatures. They've streamlined the second edition of the game and replaced the miniatures with cardboard tokens. Not only does it make the box profile smaller so it'll fit on your shelf a bit better, but it makes the game cheaper, which is a good thing, and I'm going to talk about that later. It has no marked difference in gameplay and experience as far as I can tell, but to be fair, I'm not an authority on the first edition because I only played the game in the second edition. The mechanics of the game are simple. On your turn, like most deck builders, you're going to draw a hand of 5 cards. You're going to play a hand of 5 cards. In Tyrants of the Underdark, you build your deck using a basic hand of cards, using soldiers and nobles. Over time, you can grow your deck to include more powerful creatures you might have seen if you're familiar with the D&D mythos. There are really 4 things to pay attention to when you're playing a card in Tyrants of the Underdark. Many of the cards are either going to give you influence or power. These are the 2 currencies of the game. Influence allows you to strengthen your deck by buying more and more expensive cards. Power allows you to expand your presence on the board, controlling more and more sites. The third thing you need to pay attention to is some cards will allow you to place a spy. Like most area control games, you can only place a troop where you already have a presence. For example, if you have a troop in Menzoberranzan, the capital of the Drow, you can place another troop there. Additionally, you could also place a troop adjacent to Menzoberranzan. However, the mechanic of spies allows you to place a spy at locations away from where you have a presence of troops so that you can eventually build your presence there, expanding your presence across the board by having your agents infiltrate sites where you don't already have a presence. The 4th card does something different. It could potentially give you victory points or have some other unique mechanic toward the game, but they're all different. But generally speaking, you're looking at these 4 types of things that a card is going to do: power, influence, spies, or something else. When you're thinking about building your deck, there's a lot of things you need to take into consideration. What is the card doing? Will it have an effect for you going forward? But you're also going to need to look at the card's cost and its point value at the end of the game. Let's do a breakdown of one of the cards and we can see what's important. On the top right of the card, you can see that there's the number 4. That's how much influence it's going to cost you to play on your turn to purchase this Drow Bounty Hunter from the Minion deck. At the bottom of the card, in that white square, you see 3 symbols. That's the symbol for power. Power allows you to expand your presence on the board. So if you were to play the Bounty Hunter, it would give you a pool of 3 power tokens to use in whatever way you choose. The bottom right has 2 numbers. It has 1 number in a square and 1 number in a circle. That is the point value that the Bounty Hunter is going to give you at the end of the game. The number on the left in the card-looking icon is 2. That will give you 2 points if that card is in your deck at the end of the game. However, one of those other mechanics that I mentioned is the ability to take a card out of your deck and put it into your council. If you remove a card from the deck and put it into your council, it's worth the number on the right. So for example, if I was to take the Bounty Hunter out of my deck and put it in my council, it would be worth 4 at the end of the game. Let's take a look at the Advocate card. One of the main differences you can see, of course, is that the cost is cheaper, the point values are less, but also this card is going to give you 2 influence, so you can use it to purchase other cards. But unlike the Bounty Hunter, it has an additional mechanic: promote another card played this turn. So for example, if I played the Advocate and the Bounty Hunter, I could promote the Bounty Hunter into my council, giving me points, those extra points at the end of the game. These are just 2 example cards that I pulled out of the Drow deck. Every card is going to have a slightly different ability in the white box at the bottom of the card, and they're obviously going to do different things and interact in different ways. Some of the keywords are going to be important as well. You see on the top left of the card that there is a keyword like malice or conquest. Some of the decks key on that as well, so that's something to pay attention to. Now, why don't we take a look at each of the different types of decks that are available in Tyrants of the Underdark. One of the things that I really like about Tyrants of the Underdark is its replayability. The market deck, i.e. the deck that you buy cards from, is formed by combining 2 of the 6 available Minion decks. And if I've done the math right, it means that there are 15 possible combinations of Minion decks that you can play through. Almost every game is going to be different because every Minion deck is going to interact with the other in a different way. I like that a lot. Let's go through the Minion decks and how they play. The Drow deck features streamlined cards at lower influence costs, and you'll see familiar creatures like the Doppelganger, the Blackguard, and the Underdark Ranger. You'll see a lot of cards that provide you power and influence, as well as the ability to place and manipulate spies. The Dragons deck has a number of high influence cards, and it features 5 dragons that reward you for adhering to a strategy. You'll see familiar creatures like blue, white, black, red wormlings, and the Black Dragon and the mighty Red Dragon. Each of the large dragon cards gives you victory points for different scenarios that occur in the game. For example, the Black Dragon gives you 1 victory point for every 3 white troops in your trophy hall, while the Red Dragon gives you 1 victory point for each site under your control. So purchasing these cards gives you a direction on how to play your deck. The Elemental deck features cards with a focus ability, which becomes more powerful if you have cards of the same aspect. Whenever you play a card with focus, if you play another card of that card's aspect this turn, or you reveal a card of that aspect from your hand, you get the focus effect described after the dash. For example, on the Water Elemental card, if you have a Conquest focus, it allows you to draw a card. On the Fire Elemental, if you have a Malice focus, it allows you to draw a card. On the Eternal Flame Cultist card, if you have a Malice focus, it gives you 2 power. So combining particular aspects of your deck will give you a benefit in the long run. Demons deck features cards that put a new type of card in your opponent's decks, the Insane Outcast, as well as demons that devour your own cards in order to be played. For example, the Mind Flayer requires you to devour a card in your hand and then choose one, either assassinate a troop or take 3 influence. The Glabrezu allows you to devour a card in your hand to assassinate 2 troops. It allows you to cycle through your deck more quickly to get through your powerful abilities, but be careful, if you devour too deeply, you won't have any troops to defend you if your enemies come calling. The Aberration deck features cards that can force other players to discard from their hand, reducing their strength of the turn. There's also a number of minions that allow you to draw extra cards. For example, the Aboleth allows you to either place 2 spies or draw a card for each spy you have on the board, while the Grimlock allows you to deploy a troop, and if an opponent forces you to discard this card, draw 2 cards. The Undead deck features cards that can devour themselves for added effects. With this minion deck, you can expect smaller deck sizes as the disposable minions sacrifice themselves for the cause. Paired perhaps with the Demons deck, you might have a voracious appetite of demons, powering your advance. So on your turn, you're going to be playing your influence cards, which will allow you to purchase minions, and power cards to allow you to expand your presence on the board. You'll be using your spies to give you a presence where you otherwise don't have it, and you'll be using those other powers to give you a benefit in various different ways as well. Looking at the strategy of the game, you want to make sure you have a nice balance of power and influence. It might be tempting to go hard in one direction or the other, but as the game progresses, you may find that it'll be harder for you to assert yourself in those areas. For example, if you purchase a lot of cards that give you bonus influence, you'll be able to buy a lot of cards from the minion deck, but you may not have as strong a presence on the game board. If you purchase cards that have a lot of power, you may be able to expand yourself on the game board, but you're losing access to the high value cards in the decks. Play proceeds gradually, with each player using their troops and spies to expand their presence on the board and seize more and more control of the Underdark. Play will continue until one player exhausts their troop tokens, that they've placed them all on the board, or the minion deck is exhausted. The game ends, you count victory points, and you see who wins. Tyrants of the Underdark has a lot to love. As I mentioned off the top, one of them is the replayability. Mixing those minion decks will give you a vastly play experience every single time. For example, if you started with Drow and Dragons, finished a game, immediately started another one with dragons and cultists, you're going to get a very different play experience than the one you just had, because those cards are interacting differently, and so you're going to have to account for that in your strategy. I think mixing those decks together was a really smart idea to enhance that level of replayability in this game. As I mentioned, it's something like 15 different combinations, and every time you play, it's going to be a different play experience. Another thing that they really did well is the rulebook. Now, if you've played as many games as I have, you know that the rulebook isn't always great. When I'm doing a review of a board game like this and playing it for the first time, one of the things that I do is always learn the rules from the book. I don't use guides or YouTube videos. I want to approximate how easy it would be for a relatively new board gamer to pick up and play this game based on just the rules if they didn't have access to a guide, for example. And I would say that Gale Force Nine and Wizards did a really good job on that score. When I was teaching this game, if there was something I didn't remember or couldn't remember exactly, I would open up the rulebook to where I expected the rule to be, and it was there. I found that really gratifying because so many rulebooks don't provide that experience. So a real shout out to Wizards and Gale Force 9 for making such an incredible rulebook that's accessible to people. One thing that I really liked between the first and the second edition is that Wizards and Gale Force 9 removed the minis. I know it's true, better components are better. But in a game like Tyrants of the Underdark, you're not paying for that premium mini experience. You're paying for the game, the interaction between the board mechanics and the deck mechanics. All the minis are doing is standing on the board to represent where your presence is. That can easily be done with cardboard tokens. It reduces the cost of the game quite substantially, and it takes it out of premium game pricing and reduces it to more medium weight pricing, which I think is actually really where it belongs. I would say that Tyrants of the Underdark is solidly a medium weight strategy game, meaning it's not going to take you an hour to set up and 2 hours to explain the rules, but it will have some complex strategies between how you build your board and how you build your deck, but it's relatively accessible for players who may not be comfortable with the heavy strategic games. My only point of criticism is related to the length of Tyrants of the Underdark. The box suggests that games should last about 90 minutes. and that was right on with my experience. We played for about an hour and a half, overall total of 2 hours accounting for board setup, rules discussions, etc. For me personally, I'd like to see a game like Tyrants of the Underdark come in at around 60 minutes. It feels like the right length for me. At an hour and a half, you're getting into some of those heavier strategic games. And for a nice medium weight experience, I feel like an hour would be the sweet spot. Of course, that would involve making the board a bit smaller, reducing the amount of cards in the minion decks, and reducing the number of troop tokens. The game length absolutely won't deter me from putting Tyrants on the table again. I'm really looking forward to seeing how some of those other decks play, particularly the Cultists and the Demon deck, where they have those unique mechanics. The Cultists have the Focus ability and the Demons have the Devour ability. I really think that would change the game up quite a lot, and I like that as a twist. Because like I said at the top, I think that's where Tyrants is really going to shine. Hey Phil, how you doing? Doing good, Si. How about you? Oh, you know, just trying to take over Menzoberranzan. The usual. How about you? Oh, you know, just trying to destroy everything you know and love. Ah, so it's Tuesday. Alright, so the big question. Tyrants of the Underdark, yeah or nah? Yeah, I really enjoyed the experience. I found learning the game was really seamless, and once we got into it, after that 15 minutes or so of asking continually, what am I doing again? I found myself immersed in it. I liked the idea of building my deck because I'm partial to deck builders generally, and then using my deck to control the Underdark was a lot of fun. As a D&D fan, knowing that Menzoberranzan, Gauntlgrim, Skullport are all considerably pivotal locations in the Underdark also gave it that much more flair for me. I think if you like games that are deck builders or area control, this could be one worth checking out, particularly now that the second edition is less expensive than the first. There is, of course, some player versus player interaction. You have the opportunity to assassinate your enemy's troops, to infiltrate their locations and try and take them away. So if you don't like that player versus player interaction, if you prefer more of a Euro style game where you're not directly affecting them, you're more affecting them indirectly, then Tyrants of the Underdark may not be the game for you. But for all the reasons I mentioned, the replayability, the rules, the weight, it fits a nice niche in my collection. There's not too many games where my friends who enjoy heavy strategy games and light strategy games can meet in the middle and say, yeah, this is a game that we're both going to enjoy playing. The group that I played with was evenly divided. Half preferred light strategy games, half preferred heavy strategy games. Both of the players who enjoyed light strategy games really liked Tyrants of the Underdark, and I myself also enjoyed it. The one player who's super into heavy strategy games wasn't super into it, but they also said they wouldn't mind trying it again, because I think they felt like on the board they were very far behind, but once we did the score counting, they weren't as far behind as they thought. So I feel like it might have affected their viewpoint because they felt like they were getting crushed. I'll be curious to see if their opinion changes between the first and the second playthrough. I was provided a review copy of Tyrants of the Underdark, and I'm really glad that I was, because it was a title that I actually missed when it was first released, and I'm glad I'm now caught up on it. You'd think it would have been a game that would have been on my radar because of the deck building mechanic combined with Dungeons and Dragons, but unfortunately it wasn't one that I caught wind of at the time, but now I can definitely see playing it over and over again. Alright, that's it. Thank you so much for joining me today on Yeah or Nah. I really appreciate it. If you like what you saw, please like and subscribe the video and hit that notification bell so you can get notified every time we drop new content. This show comes out every 2 weeks, but we do have other stuff that we do periodically, like unboxing videos, TTRPG VOD live plays, and more. You can also follow us on Twitter at FortNerdDotCom. We'd appreciate that as well. We who are about to play salute you.